Yeah, morning everybody. Thank you so much for joining us. My name's Karin Joseph. I work for Amos Trust. We're a member of Consortium for Street Children, and I'm the head of gender and partnerships at Amos Trust. And I think some of you may have been here this time last year where we launched this working group and started to get to know members who were interested in working in kind of getting together more regularly to talk about work with girls and young women. Myself and co-chair Liz Mnengwa from Glad's House, Kenya, who I don't think is here today, but we initiated this group with the Consortium for Street Children after some conversations with the CSC around the idea of working groups being something that the network really wanted to explore, and that this was a particular topic that we wanted to kind of kick off with initially. And so we have, I think, 9 members of the consortium. As Lucy mentioned, she ran through the list, and most of them are here today, who are part of this working group. And I'll just tell you a little bit, I guess, about the process since where we've kind of gone to from this time last year to where we are today. Following last year's session and sort of interested members getting together to join the working group, we began to meet. We had our first big meeting back in January last year. Sorry, not last year, this year, we're still in 2021, January this year. And we arranged to meet quarterly as a whole group, and also then to work on things in smaller groups at more regular intervals between that point. So really the process was to start to get to know each other's work, to discuss and begin to identify some of the shared themes and challenges across our work, and also what we wanted to start to, learn from and share more widely together. So we some of the members will speak more kind of in detail about the process in a few minutes time, but where we got to was that we identified a few themes and areas of work that we all were interested in, or that were particularly posing kind of challenges for our work with girls and young women, and then really decided to identify one of those to initially talk about as a group. So the theme that kind of emerged for a lot of members, that was something that was kind of regularly coming up in the work that they were doing, was how to effectively work with the families and boyfriends of girls and young women that they support. And this obviously is kind of a relevant theme across all organisations work with girls and young women, given that many girls' lives are controlled by others, particularly girls on the streets, and it's really seen by lots of our members that it's never quite a straightforward issue to work with girls in isolation, of course, and the need to work with the communities that they are a part of, and the individuals who may either exert control over them or be in relationship with them in other forms. So this was identified as the sort of first theme, I guess, that we as a group were going to look to learn more about each other's work and discuss and share our experiences of. We then got to the point of talking about how we wanted to, learn together and share these practices. And we were in contact with Harriet Beasley and David Walker from the CSC's reference group, both academics who have a lot of experience of working in this area. And we spoke about the approach of most significant change, and that this was a research methodology that we were really interested in as a group to use to explore this theme a bit further. So I'm going to pass over to, I think, Harriet or David, to talk a little bit more about the most significant change approach, and to explain a little bit about the process that we've been through as a group with this methodology. And then I believe Amina and Hira are going to share some reflections on that process. as members.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Karen, for the fabulous overview of where we've got to so far. David, did you want to talk first about the approach, or shall I talk a bit, then you talk a bit?
Go ahead, Harriet, and then yeah, I'll dive in as
hello everyone. Yeah, I'm Harriet, and I'm talking from the Sunshine Coast in Australia. I'm an academic at the University of the Sunshine Coast, and I've been a member of the research forum with the consortium for 6 years, I think. And I was really pleased to be invited to participate in this working group and to work with everyone on this really exciting initiative. So can we have the next slide? Is that all right? The most significant change approach is the approach that we decided between ourselves. David and I have both worked with this approach. It's an evaluation approach, and we've worked with it ourselves in various evaluations and development projects that we've worked on, and it is very much used in development. And it was developed by Rick Davis and Jessica Dart, and I encourage you to look it up, and they've got a manual which is really easy to download. It's free access. And for those of you that know Appreciative Inquiry, it's a very similar approach, basically taking a glass half full approach rather than a glass half empty. So looking for the positive aspects in a community and in a particular intervention, and documenting what's happened to make things go right, rather than always looking for the problem and seeing what's wrong. And the approach is really about capturing stories and narratives from individuals or from organisations to find out what processes they went through in order to get to a positive outcome. So it's really asking questions about the positive changes and capturing those stories and narratives. And it's in the form of an interview. So David and I, everyone in the forum was invited, everyone in the working group was invited to participate and be interviewed by David and I. And so we split the interviews up, and we ended up, I think, with 7 interviews. And we collected stories by asking particular questions, which I'll hand over to David. He can talk about that bit. And we collected stories, and then we reflected on those stories as a group. And then I can't read the end of the slide, but we agreed to focus on some stories to share with this particular group. I think the next slide has the questions on it, doesn't it?
Next. Yeah.
These are the people that we, of course, these are the people that we, the organisations that were able to participate. I think there's a couple of members, because of internet issues and other issues, they weren't actually able to participate in the interviews. But we had Chori from Nepal, and IWEI from Nigeria, and KDM from Indonesia, and Kunalaya from India, and New Generation, is it, from Burundi, and Umtombo from South Africa, and the Wayoni Child Foundation in Sierra Leone. And I believe everyone from those different organisations are here today. So it was really fantastic to get that much interest and that many stories from those particular organisations. Thank you. I think next slide now. So David, I'll hand over to you.
Thank you, Harriet. Yes. Good day, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are, everybody. Lovely to be here. The questions that we used for the most significant change approach are listed there. They don't have to be the same questions. Obviously, the topic matter or the content will vary if you want to take this methodology forward in your own work. And so certainly don't use these as prescriptive questions or a prescriptive template that you have to use, but it's a good start anyway. So what we did in our particular case was Harriet and I and others who were on the call, including wonderful support from Karen and Lucy, with the particular network members, we asked them to take a step back and reflect on a number of different potential stories that were possibly of interest to all of us. So it's not as much as a network member coming to the facilitated space to present a story that they've already got in their own heads necessarily. It's really just to come with several stories, and for us as a group to reflect on the interests of the lessons or what we thought might be the most interesting stories in terms of lesson learning and withdrawing or extracting interesting ideas or ways of working. So once you've got that in number one, you've got a few stories floating around, maybe 3 or 4. If you've got a longer session up to 2 or 3 hours, you might be able to look at more. We only had 1 hour, so we had a bit of a compressed time space. But nonetheless, we looked at 3 or 4 questions, and then we said, we looked at 3 or 4 stories, and we asked ourselves, to what extent are these stories demonstrating what is called positive deviance, or something that is shown as per the methodology to be working well or of above average success. And through a process of prioritization and just dialogue, we managed to settle generally on 1 story, sometimes 2 that were in certain ways connected. So then what we did was we worked with the network member to provide that narrative. So we got the story down on paper, and then we discussed in more detail, what does the story actually mean to us? Why is this so significant? What is it really about? So we really tried to unpack and examine with a magnifying glass the story and discuss openly and capture that discussion in our notes. And importantly for us, we wanted to also understand where the change in the story was happening. So it might have been that the story was impacting at the individual level, but maybe a whole family level. It could have been community, or it could be about the organizational processes, right? It could be about how you learn, how you design your work, how you do your evaluations or whatever. So that's essentially the approach that we used. And of course we had additional validation sessions where we summarized the notes and we checked with everybody whether that we've captured the story, because we had to tidy up the notes a little bit to improve the narrative. And we went through the validation process and then fine-tuned from there. Does that cover enough for everybody?
Yeah. Thanks so much, David and Harriet. That's great. And there'll be time to ask a bit more about the process at the end. And obviously in the breakout rooms, we can talk a little more about what it was like to capture these stories. But actually first, before we go to the breakout rooms, I'm going to pass to Hira and to Amina, Hira from Chori in Nepal and Amina from Isawali Empowerment Initiative in Nigeria, who are just going to share a few reflections about this process. I think we can go to the next slide. Yeah. Before we go into the breakout rooms, we're just going to talk a little bit about the process as a whole, as how some of the members found it. And then we'll be talking about we'll go into 3 breakout rooms to talk about some of the three themes that these stories kind of grouped around. So first of all, Hira or Amina, I don't know who would like to go first, but just maybe if you could share some of the reflections about what it was like capturing these stories.
Can I start?
Yes, please.
Namaste, everyone. I'm Hira Dahal from the organization called Chori in Nepal. The process of this MSc was really interesting. First of all, I felt it very easy and comfortable. It was so easy to talk with Harriet. Thank you, Harriet, for this comfortability that you created in the session. And I really felt that she is my good friend and a good sister. So it was very comfortable to share. And the way that she asked was very in a very simple way. The questions were simple, and they were open-ended. So it gave me enough space to explore myself, what we have done, and what are the success that we are achieving from our work. And also, like, it also helped me to think in broader level, with everything, like in every aspect of the work that we do. And not only that, like, most of the time, what we see as a result or the success of the story is like, we try to see in external way, that is the girl has got job, or is the girl have started her business, or something like that, very external factor. So we measure the success and the achievement on that part. But this storytelling method helped me to explore more. Like, we were able to explore the another aspect of the changes on the girls, like the increasing in their confidence level, and the decisive power they have, and they have built up the relationship with the family, and how they are changing themselves and helping their family and their peers. So we were able to find out more on the many aspects of the girls about their successes. Also, like, I felt so much like proud and joyful to do the session, especially after the session, because I realized that there were so many good stories that we were not looking after, and from this session I was able to see. So that was the, like, really, like, good achievement. The session itself is a good achievement for me. So regarding the theme that we focus were on, like, more on, like, flexibility and adaptability, that I realized maybe in the breakout room I will share more about it. Thank you.
Thanks, Hira. Amina, are you able to share some of your reflections too?
Yes, I agree with practically everything that Hira has shared. And for me, the reflection is, what came up for me was, sometimes we're so immersed in the work that we do that we are not always taking the time to reflect on how what we're doing is impacting on those that we're working with, and the changes, those changes that are happening. And so for me, that was something that came out as really very strong. And even the changes within the organization itself, because, when I reflect back from when we first started to today, the changes we've gone through working in the communities and what we've been learning and adjusting to try to improve, and so we can, really benefit the beneficiaries. We don't take that time. It also gave us, this MSc process gave us the opportunity to reflect on the work that we do with girls, with young women in our communities. And then another thing that I really enjoyed also was that after the stories had been collected, we came together as a group to go through our stories with each other, and hearing feedback from other organizations on our stories. For me, that was also very interesting, because some of the things that I didn't think about came up from them. So it's sort of just, oh, okay, so it was also a learning experience. I picked up many ideas and tips from the various groups that were sharing their stories, and reading other organizations' stories was also very impactful. It also made me think. I had to think deeply. I had to reflect much more, I don't know if it's outside of the box, but it was when David was asking me the questions, and the more he was really probing. So I had to really think beyond just what I had shared. And that, for me, it's a real great learning that I have picked up on. And then the broad things that would be that for us, like in our story, was more to do with the community. So when we go into our breakout groups, that will feature. And then again, in terms of the girls, in all the stories, what came out is that the girls, some start from a point of being disempowered, from a point of weakness. And over time, with the organizations working with them, they become empowered through either it's because of education, because of maybe the vocational skills, or because they've learned about their rights and how to take action. These were some of the things that came out with the girls. And for some girls, they were already empowered. They had their own self-empowerment. What they really needed was support in terms of, gaining more skills. Some had leadership, latent, hidden leadership skills that through the organizations, it came out to the forefront. And so it was really interesting reading through these stories about the girls. And for all the girls, they all need that structure. It's knowing that they have this safe space, this space that they can be comfortable, they're safe, they can be heard, they can be listened to. All of that gives them that opportunity to grow and to be able to improve on what they're doing, or to see what they're doing and move from that disadvantage point to a point of disadvantage. I think those are, for me, the MSc process was really a very powerful process, and I think it's something that really I recommend, and it's something that we've taken on board that would be doing as well in our organization. Thanks.
Thanks, Amina. Please do, when we go into the breakout rooms, feel free to ask the members of the working group questions about, more about this process, because it's quite a simple, a simple one in some ways, but it does really lead to some really deep reflection and learning, which I think has been really effective for this group. So just ahead of going into the breakout rooms, just to say a little about how that's going to work. The members of the working group have linked up with each other in three breakout rooms. So we'll be covering these three kind of themes within each of the groups. I think, Lucy, maybe you can talk about the actual logistics of this next step, but just to say that some of the stories will be shared in a little bit more detail under these kind of themes in the breakout rooms, and then there'll be a chance to sort of hear some more detailed reflection from the members who are sharing their stories, as well as asking more questions if you have them, or perhaps even sharing some of your own experiences of your work with girls and young women that maybe you feel like are reflected in the stories that you hear. So Lucy, maybe over to you, as sometimes this bit can be a little confusing for people, but if you could just guide us through the next step, that'd be great.
Aaron and Amina and Hira as well for sharing your reflections on how this process has been. So the breakout rooms, there'll be 3 of them, and they're organized under these 3 key themes that we found as we were analyzing the stories of most significant change. So you'll be you'll be sorted into these groups randomly, and they'll be led by a member of the working group, and also the stories under that theme will be shared by the network organisation that have been part of this. So it's randomly allocated, and we'll do that in about a minute. So you'll be taken away from this session and back into the other one. If you really particularly want to be in one and you're organising to another one, then message tech support and they'll be able to move you about. But the way that the breakout rooms will work is a member of the working group will share their story, and we'll open the theme out, and then we'll have that kind of open discussion where, as Karen says, you can ask direct questions, or you can talk about your kind of own workings under that theme. So we should be being sorted into breakout rooms now, and then you'll find yourself in one of them.
And quickly, just to say, could you say how much time we have in the breakout rooms?
We have half an hour in the breakout rooms, and then we'll be back to a main session where we'll talk about next steps for the stories and the process that we're at with most significant change, next steps for the group, and also open up into a general Q&A. So you'll be able to hear about the other themes in the breakout rooms and about the more general work of the working group. So half an hour in the breakout rooms, and we're coming back at 10:30, unless we decide we need slightly more time. But yeah, you should be being sorted into breakout rooms now, so just accept that room and you'll be taken there.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Karen.
I'll say if anyone would like to share anything from the not in detail, probably we don't have loads of time, but anything from the groups that they were in, anything from the stories that they heard or the discussions that they had. That would be great to hear.
So would it be the person that was the facilitator that would feedback, or
whoever, go ahead.
I'm wondering, David, I mean, maybe from your group, but I was conscious that there were people in our group that didn't have a chance to speak, and I'd really like to hear from them as well.
That's a good point. Yeah.
But that, you know, your group did what it did. I don't know what it did. So.
Should we start with your group then, Harriet? Maybe a brief summary of what was discussed, and then open invitation for the people that didn't get a chance to speak.
Yes, we were in the boyfriend group, and Lindo and his colleague and from Untitled and spoke about the amazing initiatives that they have with working with girls and their boyfriends. And Sota and Jessica spoke and talked about their work, and it was very much about how to negotiate the relationships. I think that's the main thing that came out for me, and how both organisations have very excellent ways and very deep ways of thinking about basically the psyche of the girl, but also working with her and her own agency and what she wants. So you know, out of the relationship and out of life, basically. So I would love it if someone who was attending that session was able to speak. Pia was there, Lucy was there. Looking who else is here. And Menga Michael Ajawali was there also.
Harriet, I'm very happy just to add to say what really popped out for me in that session was us not assuming, not imposing our view of the relationship, even if the relationship had negative aspects of it, respecting it and respecting the boyfriend. I think for me, that was one of the most powerful things. And if that's your starting point, you may feel it's uncomfortable to say, I'm asking permission to work with the girl to the boyfriend, but actually by creating that respect and engaging them in the process, it has more sustainability. I thought that was such a powerful message from South Africa. So.
Great, thank you, Pia. Yes, that's really true.
And just to add to that, something that really sort of hit home for me was that it's about working with the individual and making sure that your programming is adaptable, is flexible enough to support that individual where they are with what they need. There's not a sort of standardized approach that you can take. And I think this is probably a theme that cuts across.
That's so true, yeah.
All the three groups, which is actually you can have a different issue like boyfriends or community or health issues or education, but actually if you're not responding to the individual as they need at that point in time in their context, it's irrelevant what you're doing. That's sort of what I took, and it was really interesting hearing from the different speakers about their stories and what their work is like. Thank you.
Thanks, Nat. Maybe I'm not sure if anyone else from that group would like to share anything, but if not, it might be a good point to move on to the adaptability, flexibility group and hear any feedback from them, because definitely that's a topic that we also talked about in the community group, but it's something that cuts across all of it.
Yes, it's interesting how all these three threads interweave, and I just heard, I think it was Natalie Degan talking about the adaptability of dealing at the individual level. And I'll just summarize quickly in 1 minute my takeaways, and then I'll hand over to colleagues who, particularly those who weren't able to speak, Butena and our colleagues under the name Immaculate. I didn't quite catch where you were from, but in essence, I think the way that we interpreted this theme of adaptability and flexibility, we parted roads a little bit. So we came to a fork in the road, and down the one path, this individual level adaptability came up very strongly. So Hira from Chori mentioned from her story that one of the people that they're working with, a young woman, wasn't interested in doing any of the vocational training around baking or going to the bakery and working down that line of work. But instead choosing what I can only imagine to be quite a bold decision to be a driver and to do driving lessons and to be a professional driver. And she ended up working in a bank, which I can imagine, if I'm not presuming too much, is not a traditional vocation for a young woman. And that, you know, brings challenges, but it just shows you what's achievable if you adapt and adjust accordingly. Similarly with Wionia and New Generation from Santiga and from Teddy, this understanding that working with targets groups, particularly boys, required a different way, a different style of entrepreneurship curriculum, and extending or contracting accordingly depending on a group of boys or target group. So that shows you this interconnection between being flexible, adaptable at the individual level. But of course, that requires, as we discussed, and here I mentioned some examples as well, and Olivia, we discussed these challenges around the interests of the donor and setting a plan down on paper, and then having the strength or the ability to somehow part ways with that original plan. And the challenges, of course, that come with that are that at an organizational level, I think as Hira was saying, you might have a specific personality with a donor the donor might be inexperienced. There might be an intermediary for the donor who maybe has a certain type of personality, which they're quite strict and rules oriented, which is challenging when you're trying to breathe and flex and adapt to the interests and needs of the individual you're working with. And what really struck home from me was the statement of, I think it was Olivia, just prioritizing the interests and rights of the child first and foremost, and having that as your core lens, and then dealing with donors in the second frame, or in the second instance, which is not always easy to do, as we discussed. But I'll leave that I'll leave that there, and I'll invite others from the group to kind of reflect on their big takeaways or anything that inspired them during our discussion. So Teddy, Retainer, Ndula, you were there for a second, and then you disappeared to another one, I think.
Yeah,
Please.
I think it's because she wanted to talk. And for me, what I can say is like, I think flexibility and adaptability, it's really important in the kind of work we do. I would say like, for us, we try as much as possible to be flexible. And also we need to connect with the children or the youth we are working with, and looking at the kind of questions that we are really asking. Sometimes it forces you to be flexible if you don't want to be flexible, because depending on how they're answering them. So you really need to be flexible and adjust to the kind of maybe answers, or also the way you set the environment for them to feel like this is a safe space for me and I can share whatever I need to share. So definitely you just need to be very flexible and also adapt to their kind of situation. Once you understand people's story, then even the way you are going to handle them is a bit different. Sometimes I think we are having a challenge when it comes to one. Sometimes if it's a policy issue within an organization, because I remember like in my organization, when a child leaves the center and drops back to the street, when they come back, like they are given 3 chances. We had to challenge that, like maybe we are not meeting the expectations. Why are you only giving them 3 chances? We just need to look at what didn't work so that we see how we can, and we had to remove that policy, because we said if they keep on coming back, it means there must be something good that we are doing. That is what is making them coming back. The other thing sometimes that limits maybe our flexibility sometimes has to do with funding. Sometimes you can get a child who tells you, okay, I want to go to school. Then when he goes to school, maybe you've not prepared the child, because sometimes they go to school and they are told you have to do an exam, and you have not prepared this child to do the exam. So we went to one school and the child had told us, like, if you allow me to go back to school, I don't want to do exams because I'm not ready for the exams. And we had to talk to the school and ask them to be flexible, because this was coming from the child, and we thought like that was very genuine. I've not been in school. Why are you asking me to do exams? And they agreed, and the boy was able to keep the their child in school. So for me, I think it's really important. And for us, if you want things to turn out positively, definitely we need to be flexible and fit in within their situation.
Thank you.
I
quickly just wanted to check if in your breakout room, David, if in that group you shared your analogy about the boats, and if you didn't, I wonder if that's something we could share as the whole group as a kind of wrap up for this, this session.
Sure,
I feel like
yeah,
it was,
I'll try to. Yeah,
people really reflected. Yeah.
We didn't go into that detail, but it's a common analogy in Hyde, where I'm from, where I'm sitting anyway. But it's really to think about the network members as a flotilla or a series of small yachts or boats, sailboats. Let's think of them as compared to these huge organizations, the international NGOs like CARE International or Oxfam or ActionAid. The consortium members are able to be lots of tiny ships floating and maneuvering in the wind. And if you like, I think what's interesting to understand about adaptability is that we're not talking about adaptability and flexibility like you're a yacht just floating with the wind and bouncing on the waves, whatever, and just doing anything. No, what the metaphor is really to explain is that the wind can take you in different directions, but when you see a sail ship, it zigzags and it goes in different directions and it's able to maneuver, but it's always able to go in the direction that it's aiming to go. And you have to do that in a conscious way. So in adapting, it's not as though you just kind of do anything, you just adapt all the time and you don't stick to a plan. Rather, the idea of adapting is in between sticking to the plan and trying to tailor for individual needs or for group needs, or listening to the feedback that you're getting positively or negatively, and using that constructively to adapt what you're doing. And that's I guess the metaphor is to say, think of yourself as a yacht that is able to go with, adjust and be able to turn direction quickly, but generally also be very conscious about moving in a specific direction. Don't just get lost in the waves. I think that's basically what we were trying to summarize with that metaphor. Yeah,
thanks, David. And I think as a kind of, I'm a sort of lifelong believer in the power of small organizations compared to big ones, perhaps. And I think, the other ship in that, on the seas is often the kind of big, huge cargo ship that can't turn itself around, or might get stuck in a canal, or and I think the power of small organizations being able to maneuver is where a lot of this change, even if it takes slightly longer to get to the destination, it's often a better journey. I'll just quickly ask if anyone from our group, from working with communities, hearing from Paul and Amina, wants to feedback, because I'm just aware of time, and we can, if people don't have questions, we can keep talking in this kind of way, but we don't have loads of time left. So if anyone from our group wanted to feedback, or from Paul or Amina, just to share briefly about the discussion we had, please do. If not, I can.
Okay,
yeah.
Okay, Paul, you want to go, or should I'll go?
Please, Amina, you please go. Yes.
Okay, so our group, we were talking about community, the work we do, and for me, what the similarities I saw in the work that we do and that of Paul's organization, we're in opposite ends of the world. He's in India and we're in Nigeria, was that when working with people, it's best to work with and not for the community, and that it takes time for people to change. And so for that, it means it's a continuous process, a consistent, continuous process. And the change happens from the individual at the individual level and translates into group level. They become empowered once the individual is empowered themselves. And that as an organization, another similarity I saw was there's this need for hand holding till they get to where they can exist for themselves, and at the same time advocating for government to support these groups, because they tend to get sidelined. We're talking about illiterate vulnerable, marginalized, underserved communities. And so it's also advocating to government, trainings for the groups themselves, the individuals themselves. So it's like, it's a multi approach. There's no one approach, it's multi. And in the process also, that when these women become empowered, they serve as role models to others. The individual and the group themselves become role models to others who now want to emulate, to learn from them, to be like them. And so those are the kind of changes. And then also engagement with the gatekeepers. Males are the gatekeepers, and if you don't engage with them, they can prevent you having access to the women. And that's because societies are very patriarchal in nature, that is conservative, and the men feel they have the right to control the women. So it's also engaging with women as well, with the male gatekeepers as well. So these were some of the change, my own take on, and also the fact that women become confident. Their self-esteem rises when they can take ownership, when they can do things for themselves. So it's really about not disempowering them, but supporting them to become empowered, giving them that enabling environment.
Thanks, Amina. And actually, one thing I would just add from the link between the adaptability, flexibility conversation that came out in the stories that Amina and Paul were sharing is also just about, as she mentioned, the length of time. And I think length of time of intervention is often needs to be factored into this thought about, flexibility, because you might get some funding for a year, but that doesn't allow for much flexibility or trust building or learning, or maybe having to turn your ship around a little. So I think the conversation with donors, if this goes in that kind of direction as well, would be really about advocating for the power of longer term interventions. I'm keeping an eye on the clock. I don't know if we want to just quickly share some of the next steps for the group and for these stories. Just to say that this session, the working group session in this network forum, we're not at the end of a process here. You've kind of caught us in the middle of one. So we are definitely still working on these stories and capturing the learning from them. We will be validating them further and sharing them in a more kind of digestible form to the rest of the network at a point in the future, so that people can read them in their own time, or get in touch with us for more details about those. But David, is there anything else you would like to share, maybe about the next steps in most significant change process for these stories, before we just talk about the next steps for the group?
No, nothing really significant to add. I don't know, Harriet, whether you want to chime in as well. It's essentially just a triangulation process and synthesizing with some examples the core messages coming out of this exercise, which have been numerous. And I think that the challenge will be looking at the interweaving parts of those themes and trying to take it up a notch for kind of organizational learning purposes.
Yeah, I agree. Absolutely, David. And as Amina was speaking, it was resonating so much with what Linda and Jessica had just been saying. And, I really want to, listen to this recording again and try and, sort of tease out some of these really interesting themes, other themes that have emerged from these conversations. So thank you so much, everybody, for your contribution and participation in this process. It's so rich.
Thank you.
Yeah, great. Thank you.
Lucy, is there anything you would like to share from your perspective of this? I know we have a few minutes before we need to get off at just before 11, don't we, in time for the next group. But if there are any last questions from anyone, or if Lucy, you would like to share anything from CSC about the next steps, do let me know.
I think, other than sort of wrapping up what everyone's been said, I think a huge thank you to the members of the working group as well. I think one of the key themes is just simply how much work you're all doing, and then to find and carve out that time, as Amina said kind of in the beginning of the session, we're good at doing, but we don't often sit back and reflect on those changes. So I think super appreciative of all of the working group members finding that time to sit and go through this process with us and be with us for the year of this working group, as well as to Karen, David and Harriet for really hosting that and bringing us along. It's been a real pleasure to be part of these groups and to hear all of those stories. But yeah, in terms of next step for the group, as Karen said, it's an ongoing process, and if any network member here isn't part of the working group and is really interested in being part, then I do really encourage you to get in touch. Obviously we'll be doing the next step for the most significant change part of it, but you know, we've been looking very much at the kind of practitioners, and we might move towards looking at the beneficiaries in the next kind of stage of this working group. But it is a working group and a working process, so do get in touch if this is something that you want to be part of. I don't know whether someone was contributing there, but yeah, I think that's it from next steps from myself. We probably don't have the time for a Q&A, which is a real shame, but also good to know that you know, that the discussions and that everyone really wants to contribute enough that we couldn't quite fit it in an hour and a half, so that's good learning for us, but it's a continuing conversation. Karen, I don't know whether you want to wrap up with a couple of words, and then I can let people know which session is next and where we're at in the general network forum.
No, just to say thank you so much for, I think it's been a real privilege to be part of the working group for this year so far, and I do really encourage people, if they're interested, to get involved, to get in touch with us. As well as this most significant change, I hope the members of the working group would agree it's also just a space to learn from each other and to connect with others doing similar work to you, and to, you know, outside of the group itself, please just, you know, be building those relationships to learn from each other, as I know quite a few people are doing. So please do get in touch with Lucy or with myself, and we'd love to draw you into it. So, and thanks so much for Harriet and David's involvement as well. It's great to have you guiding us through this learning.
Great. Can we have the next slide, which would just explain where we're at, and the next session, which is in 2 minutes, accessing central services and learnings from 2021. So we'll leave this session and then there'll be a new link to join that, but please do join us. I won't click on to the next couple of slides because it talks about what's coming up, but just a huge thank you to everyone involved in the working group and part of this session. I hope that it's, I hope you've enjoyed it. I've just put my email there in case anyone does want to get in contact, but yeah, you'll interact with loads of members of CSC and carrying on a couple of other sessions if you do want to get involved, and we might come up with a more formalized way of doing so. But I'll leave the session there, and I hope to see many of you in a minute at the next session, and thanks to everyone involved.
Thank you, everybody.
Well done, Lucy.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thanks.
Bye.
Bye. Bye.